Okay, so what I'd like to talk about is the growing use of design in the tech industry, and how sometimes to us designers that progress can feel slow. And sometimes it can be challenging for designers to feel that they're having the strategic influence that they'd like to have. So I first came across UX way back in the year 2000. I was working as a software developer. And this was just when we had survived the Y2K bug, civilization was still intact, computers were notorious for being hard to use. And in this moment, I found honoring legitimacy. And I would be flawed. Yes, this is what we need. This is the way I want to. So even then, there was a lot already established in this field. If you go way back to 1970, Xerox PARC was already establishing human-computer interaction. And by 2004, all the things that we look up as foundational to how we do user experience were already there. So you would think now, 20 years later, we've got this really well figured out, right? So let's see how this is going. Okay, so now it's 2022. You're at work, and they come to you with a new project. And the designers were all excited. We're going to jump in. We're going to explore. We're going to ask them these why questions. And what are you met with confusion, concern, and wondering about these don't feel like the important things. So then I'm wondering, it's like, have we made it very far at all? What's going on? Okay. So then we pause this scenario and give ourselves a little bit of a break and say, actually, we have an amazing time of momentum. And if you look at the training that's out there, just among the college programs, undergrad and graduate, there's great programs all around the world. There's all kinds of things that are alternatives to university education out there. There's lots of free resources. If you look at how people are hiring, look at IBM in the year 2012, they had one designer for every 72 software developers. By 2017, they had one designer for every 8 software developers. In 2020, within 1 year, Facebook hired 1,000 designers. And we have roles in UX from entry level all the way up to the C-suite. So obviously, businesses are valuing what we do, right? Look at the tools out there. It wasn't very long ago that there were no dedicated UX tools, right? I remember making my mock-ups in Photoshop and interactive prototypes with Keynote. And now look at this abundance of riches that's out there. Among not just UI, but research and ways to manage and facilitate the work that we do. Okay, so even with all that, we know that it can still feel difficult. And one reason is people like to work on things that are really defined. That's just so comfortable. And by its very nature, design is squishy and undefined. And the people that we work with, the organizations, have to feel that the return of design is greater than this possible discomfort that they would have to go through. And in addition, our training is to be user-centered, right? That's part of how we evolve the impact that we hope for. But that actually can be really working against us. So let's go back to these initial questions that we would have. And when we come in here, the reason we're asking these questions is we see opportunity, a way to make a difference. And the organization, what do they see? They see risk. They're scared, right? When they see these unknowns, first they knew where their project was going, they had a definitive timeline of when things could be delivered, they knew how much it would cost, and now we're coming in and they feel like we're just tearing it off. And what's happening here is there's a fundamental disconnect, because we have most of our empathy for one group of users, which is the customers. And then we have low understanding for another very important group, the business. And so what it is we cannot solely focus on this part that we love, the user experience. So when I was working with the innovation lab at Lilly, there were other groups that were interested in how we were working. And we put on a design thinking workshop. It was a half-day thing. And people that went through it were just delighted because they never had a chance before to have a way to directly consider how the work they were doing and how it was used by patients. And it got so much traction that they asked us to do it again and again, and then they added it to their official professional development courses. And before long, we had hundreds of employees went through this workshop. And it sounds amazing, right? All this exposure to work. But what I did not hear was the ability for anybody that went through that workshop to then use those methods in their day-to-day work. So what happened? Well, you might have seen a diagram like this before, right? And you know to do design well, you have to consider all three of these, the business, the user, and the technology. And with these workshops, they're so overemphasized on the user that we did not consider how they would bridge and tie that back into the business and the tech. And so you can see how it's easy for us to make these users much larger than the other two. Well, how do you think some of these other areas see this diagram? Well, business probably sees it more like this. Right? The business is concerned about how do we get money from people our way. That's what they're thinking about. Okay. So we need to face the truth here. To reach our goals for the user, we have to work with the money. And in fact, if you look at the big jumps through history of adopting design, those decisions were based on that, not based on increase in value to users. In the early 80s, when the PC revolution happened, this is when things switched from mainframes to personal computers. And with mainframes, the enterprise decides to spend the money. Now that we had personal computers, people at home, the users, the end users were deciding to spend the money. So all of a sudden, user experience was getting in the way of money flowing to the business. With the web revolution, you would pay for software first, and after you bought it, you would experience it. With the web, you experience it first. If you like it, then you would pay for it, right? So it was because there was a block in the flow of money. That was the first priority, followed up by user experience would help unblock the flow again. If you look at startups, and when they get mature enough to where they want to hire a head of design, often the first project that they'll focus on is a design system, right? And these are some of the reasons that a business would really value a design system. So what's in common about these reasons? Well, they're not about user experience either. They're about money. It's the business got to a point where they couldn't scale well, and a design system would really help them have more reuse. They could get their productivity up, and they could distribute knowledge because now it's documented how all these components should be used, and they could be more consistent in their brand. These are all about growing the company better first, the user experience second. So what do we need to do here? Okay, so we need to understand the values of the business because the business is as much users as the customers are. So these are things like asking questions. What are the key activities of the organizations we work with? Who are doing these types of activities? How do you reach, complete, and keep customers? What's the business currently striving to do? And why is that important to do right now? And then that very thing they're doing right now, how does that help them get to where they want to be in a few years? So once you have these business needs, you have to yank them together with the user needs, and that's what we designed for, both of those together. And if you're looking for practical ways for how to do this, there's this book by Teresa Torres called Continuous Discovery Habits. And it's got some very practical methods on pursuing this. And I've heard from other folks that have read this that it's easy to come to this from just a user lens. But if you read this book, make sure you pay attention to all the business things. Okay, so we actually live in an amazing time for our industry. To do what we value for the users, we can't solely focus on the user experience. And the other thing that we need to do is learn to speak the language of the business. So thanks so much. If you'd like to talk about this more, I'd love to.